Welcome to our keynote interview at TheGrill with Scott Stuber, the head of global films at Netflix. We are here in the Netflix headquarters for this particular interview, and let me tell you a little bit about Scott. Scott Stuber oversees a vast film production, acquisition, and distribution empire that is far beyond the scale of traditional studios, which is where he grew up. Scott, I've learned, started as an assistant at Universal Studios. He then rose over time to become the co-president of production at that studio and then vice chairman of worldwide production. And he then transitioned to become one of the studio's top producers. Then in 2017, Scott made the leap to Netflix as the industry started its transition to streaming and as streaming began its rise in the movie business. Since then, he's been ramping up production to roll out about 60 movies a year in the United States, this year anyway, and another 20 to 30 movies globally. Among the major titles for awards Netflix has this fall include Jane Campion's Power of the Dog, Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Lost Daughter, which both just won Glory at the Venice Film Festival, but he has also been the executive who oversaw Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, the Academy Award winner Marriage Story, Roma, and streaming hits The Old Guard and Bird Box. He also, I happen to know, has 3 extremely adorable kids. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
This is a big deal for us to have you as our keynote interview at TheGrill, and thank you so much for having us to your home in Netflix. All right, let me just start by asking you to comment on a quote that Patty Jenkins, the director of Wonder Woman 2, said this year at CinemaCon not too long ago, just a few weeks ago. She was asked about streaming movies, and she said, quote, "I don't hear about them, I don't read about them. It's not working as a model for establishing legendary greatness."
You know, listen, we're in a really changing time, right? And I think we're all trying to figure out what that means, and everyone's got their perspective on it. I think what we're all trying to get to is maintaining movies, right? Maintaining that 2-hour thing of where we all fall in love with that story. We've all seen iterations of this over our lifetimes. We've seen the VHS, we've seen different things. The truth is, greatness comes in what that story is, right? And then how you get it to those people is a different iteration of what we're going through right now. But everyone's gonna have their own perspective. We're all trying to figure it out. And for us, we're trying to make the best movies, right? And finding the widest possible audience. And so having done it theatrically and then seeing the numbers that we do streaming-wise, I can say we're reaching in an amount of people that is sometimes far exceeding what theatrical can. So I think for all of us, it's figuring out in this new world order, what is going to be greatness? What is going to be memorable? How are we going to define these movies for generations the way they did for us? So it's an ongoing conversation.
That doesn't sting for you a little bit that a leading director would feel like, I can't achieve greatness if I come make my movies at Netflix, which listen, some people did say they have changed their minds over time too.
Yeah, and listen, for me, I came here with the recognition that I was starting at the bottom, right? The recognition that we were in last place, and in some ways not even
What do you mean by starting at the bottom? What do you mean?
Meaning that in the film industry, we were gonna have to build a film studio and prove ourselves.
Right.
I wasn't inheriting a legacy studio. I wasn't taking over Paramount or Warner Brothers where people knew what they were and what they had in their library. It was, we have no library, we have no IP. What are we gonna do? How are we gonna define ourselves? How are we gonna be different? And with that comes criticism, with that comes concern, with that comes all these things. If you're not listening to those criticisms, if you're not adapting to them, then you can't build something special, right? And so 4 years in, I'm proud of what we've accomplished, but we have a lot to accomplish. So someone like Patty Jenkins, I want to hear what she has to say. She's an incredible storyteller, a big filmmaker. And so if those things aren't resonating for her, then it's incumbent on me to listen, hear them, show her where I think maybe there's a different point of view, but also figure out within her point of view how I can expand and make it great, right? So you don't build it overnight. You continue to iterate it, and this has always been a long-term plan for me. How do we get to the place where everyone at some point in the next 5 years goes, that's the best film studio in the world, and that's something we're trying to do.
That is a really compelling vision that you've just described, and maybe I would have heard Ted Sarandos, who was really he was the first keynote interview at our very first grill 12 years ago and came a bunch of other times. Netflix was nothing like the company it is today, was nothing like the powerhouse it is today. The entire power dynamic in this industry has changed, and COVID, as you know, has transformed that completely? Like what was happening and what we would talk about at the Grill every year, like the change is happening, the change is happening. And then finally, like 2 years ago, I remember I stood up in my opening remarks, I'm like, the change is here, people, but that was before COVID even. Now, it's like, disruption is just constant and total, but Netflix has been able to ride above that because all of those disruptive changes that everybody else is adopting now, you guys already did. Do you feel like some kind of vindication in going through this period where Netflix continues to gain subscribers past where I think people thought were possible in terms of numbers, continues to expand globally, and now you're making, it's really kind of hard to get my head around this 60 movies a year, it seems, or I guess it's 70 or it's some kind of crazy number.
It's a lot, yeah. But it's not just me. We have a lot of great executives and teams. And
it's not just you? You're not making
no,
all
it's just not
moves.
me in the corner, yes. It'd be a lot of
reading.
reading.
That's so great to know, okay.
But I think to your point, I mean, listen, when I took the job, a lot of it was the recognition that the world was changing. And you mentioned in your opening remarks, I have 3 kids.
Right.
And I watch the way they work, and I watch the way the world is changing, and I watch how I can get a car on my phone to pick me up. I can get a place to stay. I can go get a coffee. I can order a tie. The world was iterating through technology so quickly. And for me, the option and the opportunity to build a studio but learn this new distribution model was very appealing. To your point, I remember a very close friend of mine calling me when Disney bought Fox. And I had had these conversations with him about, you should take this job. We're all going to have to learn this model. It is the future. Learn it before everyone else has to. You'll have the old and the new in your brain. And he called me that morning and he said, the future's now, right? Something cataclysmic happened in the legacy that we had all grown up in, and now Fox was no longer going to be Fox. And so I think we've seen all that accelerate over the last couple of years, and to your point, COVID has accelerated somewhat. But you can't, to me, get lost in those things because then you lose focus on what really matters. And what really matters is telling great stories. I think the expansion of these things globally, all these studios making things, it's great for the creators. There's so many opportunities globally. There's so many opportunities in Europe and Latin America and Asia for these great storytellers to tell their story to a global audience. So I think you have to look at it as what it's going to become and how we're going to change the world through storytelling, which, not to be Pollyannish, but I think we need it more than ever as a culture and as a world where we're dividing ourselves more. And if we can see ourselves through each other, hopefully we'll heal those differences that we're creating. But I do believe it's a great time, and I think in the film business in particular, which is changing in a way that is radical and unsettling for all of us, including me, how do we find that balance? What is it going to be so that my kids love it as much as I do, right? I
Don't you worry that there won't be movies in theaters for your kids to go to when they're
No, I
your
don't
age,
believe
for
that.
example?
I think that's,
you don't?
no, I think, you know, we all love the communal experience, right? If you think of all those things that we can have at home in different variations, whether it's food in restaurants, whether it's sporting events and live sporting events, whatever it is,
that was always Ted's line, right, about you don't always, you cook at home,
but
you go
I
out,
think
but
about
still.
it, I can, you know, with sports now, I can watch the Rams every weekend if I wanted to at home, but there's something, I'm excited to take my son to see Tom Brady in 2 weeks, right? It's going to be a great day for our family. Those are things that you can't replicate. So I think the human experience is always finding those moments. The theatrical experience is a great presentation of a film, the sound, the design, everything that the filmmaker wants. There's a bunch of things that I was trying to get everyone to communicate around, and I think now we're all talking about, and I think it's good for the business.
Well, ideally, what role would you like to see Netflix play in theatrical, if any, or is it just like, nope, that's
No, I think it's important. I mean, I think it's been misreported so much how negative this company has been about theatrical, and it never was that, right? I mean, what Reed figured out very quickly was the relationship with the audience and the relationship with the consumer, right? And I think what we've done as a company is recognize that consumer is financing our movies, right? At the end of the day, that they are our financier. And so we have to figure out a model that they're expecting to get that film as soon as it's released, right? So what we've done is try to figure out iterations on that. We worked with the Academy, we worked with different things in terms of how we, you know, qualify. Roma got 3 weeks, The Irishman got 5 weeks, Marriage Story. So we've been much more dynamic than people think. We were just not completely fitting within the 3-month window, right? Which is a difficult window,
Well,
and it's
and
why it
typically
became very specific in terms of the movies that got made.
No, but it's still very much the exception that a Netflix movie would ever be in a theater. And it's very specific around the movies that you wanted to bring awards attention to. And perhaps give people the experience of seeing it, or maybe make the director happy as well, who wants to see his or her film on a big screen. Patty Jenkins.
Well, we put a lot of films in theaters that people don't recognize, right? So we've actually had a lot of theatrical. It's just been mainly because the big exhibition, which wanted the full window, has been the challenge. But we had a great relationship with Cinemark earlier this year with Army of the Dead, and we put it in all their theaters and had a great result with them and a great result for the film. So we're all iterating and going into it, so we're having the conversations.
Do you have in your head, like, I would like to have 10 movies a year in theaters, or...
No,
3?
to me, it's not even a number. It's about what is worthy, right? What makes sense for us and for the exhibition and for the filmmaker, right? At the end of the day, it's a business model, just like Netflix is a business model, right? So if you can find the right film that feels like people will want to come out of the home, experience that film on the big screen, have that model and do it, then it could be 5, it could be 50, right?
Can you give me an
no
example?
number.
Let's see, you've got some very big films coming out at Christmas. Are they going to be in theaters?
Yeah, well, Hand of God, Power of the Dog, they'll all have the theatrical.
They'll be in theaters. What about your
Harder
like
They
commercial
Fall,
or
Harder They Fall will
your
be
more commercial
theatrically.
films like Red Notice? Is that going? Is that going in theaters?
Yep. So we're just working it out now. I mean, we're obviously all dealing with what the COVID restrictions are. So we're all, whether it's us or Sony or Universal, we're all trying to figure out those models right now. So we're working through it globally like everyone else. I mean, right now, unfortunately, as we know, New Zealand and Australia are shut down because of COVID. So it's an ever-going kind of maneuver, but everything intentionally has that for this fall.
Is that something that you feel like you've brought to the role as somebody who really grew up in the legacy studio system and maybe has a love for theaters, and that you brought that with you to Netflix?
Yeah, and I think, listen, Ted has a great deep love, and so does Reed of movies, right? They're real movie lovers, and for me,
for sure,
you have no idea how important that is to work at a company. I have worked and know friends who work at many of these companies where the boss or the owner doesn't even like movies, or doesn't even watch movies, or doesn't think it. It's
really?
And so to have someone like these guys who have such passion for it and love it and talk about it and get excited about not only what we're doing but what they see at festivals it's a great thing for me, and particularly the teams who know that there's such enthusiasm up above about what we're doing. And then the reality is we know that we have to build into it. I mean, the other thing that became so fire and brimstone was, remember, we had nothing. We couldn't remake a movie. We didn't own Pixar. We didn't own a piece of IP. We didn't own DC. And if you studied the business, which I did quite a bit, those original films very rarely got made. And if they did, they had a very finite amount of time because they were getting followed by a big Marvel movie or a big thing. So the calendar was difficult. So to make a business, to make a successful business, we had to build slowly and smartly. If we had have just rushed all those films into the long-term theatrical business, we wouldn't have been successful, and that's not how you build a strong business.
So Netflix, as you continue to run the film business, will regularly have your movies in theaters. Is that?
Yeah, we've had it for the last 3 years, and we're going to continue to do it.
A little bit, Scott, like
no,
hardly. Come on, I mean.
No, we've had great runs with our partners at Landmark and Alamo and different places.
What's the widest
release you've done? It's really been that they've tried to hold us to that long-term
that window, yeah, of course.
And now I think we're trying to figure out with everyone, we're having the same conversations as everyone, right? And I think, you know, right now we have a longer
like a
window this fall
window.
than some of the traditional studios
do,
right?
Like
so
which
yes.
one?
So some of the things that are all day and date, like Warner Brothers right now, we have a longer window than them, right? So it's all changing.
Warner
and they're
Brothers
trying
just
to
lost
change
Christopher
their business.
Nolan. I mean, that is not a happy day for Warner Brothers.
That was a big change in the world.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, everyone's trying to figure it out, and everyone's trying to do right by COVID, trying to do right by their partners. I mean, it's a unique time that everyone's working through. And for us, it's trying to find out within these changes, where do we fit, right? And we're having those conversations, and they've been great, right? And,
so
and we'll find the right model.
Let me ask you about the flip side of that. So I was asking you about the theatrical side. At what point, now that you have sort of toe-to-toe competitors that are as tech-savvy as Netflix is, Amazon, Apple, deep pockets as Netflix has been able to have, and committed to really owning a share of the market. How are you feeling about that, the rise of these streamers? And we can talk about Peacock as well, and all of them. Where is like the glut moment? It's too much choice, too many subscriptions for the average person, paying not enough time in the day to watch all the stuff that's being put out there. Like we talked about Peak TV 2 and 3 years ago. I know you're film and not TV, but the principle's the same. There's just a lot of content out there. Yeah. How are you thinking about that?
I think you recognize great is everything now. great, you have to make things great, right? So if you're making 8 or 80, you have to make them great. There is such competition for people's attention
How is that
across
possible?
every
How is
medium.
that possible? You can't make 80 great movies.
No, but I think you have to reconsider who's great for, right? So you have to think about what audiences you're serving. What we know in this big of an audience globally that we have, great to use, different to someone from another country, from another generation, from different things. So you have to be thoughtful about that, right? And then when you're making that, whether it's a teen rom-com or a big sci-fi movie, then you have to execute as great as you can, right? And I think if I have a criticism about our own selves, we have to get better at that, right? That is the thing that I'm striving for. It's how do we consistently make great film? How do we do that on a big level? And I think that's for all the competitors. I think that's for all of us, is we, whether it's television, film, music, the new restaurant, there's a lot of choices for the consumer. Technology has opened up our opportunities in so many ways. And great is what is working, right? Novels, books, whatever it is. So for us, as people making art, the obligation is to make great things so the consumer thinks of Netflix as the home for the best in what we're trying to achieve.
Take a step back for me and help me understand how practically you go about your job, because it is really hard, just having observed and covered the traditional studio business for a long time, where people are making anywhere from 10 to 12, or at their heyday, 20 movies a year. I'm picking a number, but whether it's Disney or Warner Bros., whatever, to something like a number like 60. And I realize that they're not all huge, $150 million budgets, although some of them are. So how do you go about organizing, prioritizing, or get where you're getting involved, because you're one person?
Well, we've got a lot of teams, so it's almost like multiple studios, right? We just don't sub-brand the way traditional studios have in the past with Sony with Classics and Screen Gems and TriStar and whatnot, or Fox when they had 2000. But we have a version of that, right? So we have an animation group who makes our animation films. We have a documentary team. We have a team that is kind of akin to Searchlight and New Line. So they'll make some of the art films, they do the acquisitions, they make a lot of the teen rom-coms or the horror films, and then we have the big studio team, and we have the international team. So I have a lot of extraordinarily talented people running those divisions for me.
So what do you
So then I come in,
involved in? Yeah.
So then I get involved with all of them. So every week I have a meeting with each one of those teams. We go through what they're doing, what they need. Inevitably there's 2 or 3 needs that I have to step into, whether it's talent relations, whether it's will you watch the cut of this film, will you read the script because we want to make it. So it's kind of moving through, and I've got a good rhythm on it, right? At the beginning, it was new, to your point. The scale was really unique, right? You're like, okay, how do I build this, get the right people in those places, and then maintain the scale? And so I feel really good right now with what we have. We have a really strong group of executives. We all know each other well, so they know when to raise their hand, and they know when to get it done. And
they're generally asking you, Scott, read the script, rather than here's our top, here's what we're going to have to make some decisions, and I'm going to go home and read these 10.
No, I still have, now it's digital. It used to be the joke that we
whatever.
have for those of us who've done it for a while was the box on your front door on Friday night. Now it's a digital box that I get every Friday night. And it's, the new cut of whatever big movie we're making, as well as here's the 8 or 12 scripts that we want you to look at this weekend.
And you read them? I
do. I think it's important in this job, you have to stay refined, right? I mean, you go back to earlier, I like the competition. I grew up playing sports. I like competition, and the only way you can stay good is to stay sharp and continue to refine your skills. So I think one of the skills I have actually is reading a script and figuring out where it's broken, or watching a cut and figuring out where it's broken. And I think it's important for me to continue to do that and help guide the teams, and particularly when you've been in it with the producers and you're on draft 9, and sometimes you're not seeing the forest through the trees. It's good for me to come in and be like, if you did this and this, you guys should think about that. So it's something I really enjoy.
I mean, I have to say, you have always made it look pretty easy. I've followed your career for a long time, which I'm sure is really aggravating to other people. What was the trajectory? I mean, you acted when you were younger.
Not traditionally.
You told me
You
told me before
I
we started.
always wanted to be in the film business, never an actor. I was always behind the scenes, and
except for Free Willy.
Well, yes, but I worked for Richard Donner. I think probably the secret, and I'll get to the acting thing, was I worked for Richard Donner and Lauren Schuler Donner, and he loved to put people that
Legendary
worked with him into the movie. The greatest, one of the Hall of Fame human being, Hall of Fame career, which is rare in our business.
Very.
And he loved to put people in the movies, like for fun that worked for him, as jokes. So he, in a movie, Free Willy, he made me be a police officer, and then in Assassins, a valet parker, and played a joke on me because I had to pull the car around for Julianne Moore and Sylvester Stallone. And he put the seat as far up against it. He had the props team put the seat up and rig so when I turned it on, the wipers and the spray would go like I had screwed up the take, which obviously as a kid, you're afraid. There's Rocky and there's Julianne Moore. So I'm like, please don't make me do this. So he made me do it and then got a good laugh out of it and got a good drag reel. But the truth was it was always behind the camera and behind the scenes. And I think, listen, I got really lucky in this business. I had excellent mentors. I had people that really guided me and taught me, starting with Dick and Lauren, who are A-plus people. And if you look at the lineage of who Lauren trained, it's me and Nina Jacobson and Jeremy Kleiner and Kevin Feige and Julie Dirk and just an incredible group of people.
That's quite a group.
Yeah, and it's a testament to her, right, and who she was and the way she taught us and made us learn. And then, you know, I was lucky to go to Universal at a time with a group of colleagues the same age, roughly, with Kevin Misher and Donna Langley and Mary Parent and Ali Brecker, God rest her soul, was an incredible person. And just Holly Barrio and Stacey Snyder and Mark Platt, and they were great. So we were all in it together. And then Ron Meyer was an excellent mentor, and I've been lucky with Ted and Reed. So I've been blessed in terms of good people, gracious people that understand fair and right. And so you learn that way. That's how you learn, and you learn to try to do the job as hard as you can. I mean, I have great parents that were like, work hard and always look someone in the eye and tell them the truth, right? Your word is everything.
I know, what are you doing in Hollywood, Scott? That is definitely not this business.
But, you know, I mean, I think it's helped me that way because I think people know I will follow through. I will give them my word. I will try to succeed for them. I will try to follow through. And when I can't do it and I say I can't do it, there's a reason and there's a truth behind that, hopefully.
Because sometimes you got to deliver bad news. Let me ask you a question. If you were running Warner Brothers last year and had to make the decision that theatrical was going away at least for a year, and God only knows beyond that, and movies that people like Patty Jenkins were 1,000% committed to theatrical, and others, but that was one in particular we know. There's been criticism leveled that there was no proper warning of the people who were involved at this shift. Do you think that was you would have handled that differently?
Well, I think we can all speculate on things, and it's hard to know anyone's business or what the meetings were, or what they're in. And what I do know is Toby and Ann are strong, terrific people and smart executives. I don't know Jason, but he seems like a really smart guy who's tried to figure out how to move that company into what corporate really wanted to move him in. So we can all be critics in those situations, but to me, it's more about like the empathy of they're dealing with COVID, they've got a big slate, they have a big business initiative. How they got there, you can all pick over, but I think it's actually done well for them. And I think on that particular issue, the truth is we're all dealing with big egos and we're all insecure. At the end of the day, the great thing about this business is we're in touch with our 13-year-old self. The bad thing is that 13-year-old self is always there. That fear of not coming through, that fear of not succeeding, that fear of putting yourself out there and no one liking your joke or no one liking your movie. And when we remember that about each other and we empathize and we communicate, we avoid a lot of the problems, right? So I think that to me is I always think the person on the other end of this phone is coming at it from a really vulnerable place. And my job is to over-communicate with that person to figure out how we get to the common end of what we need to do to help each other be successful.
Tell me about the movies you're excited about from Netflix. I saw Power of the Dog. It's wonderful. Jane Campion's new movie. There's a lot of movies I haven't seen yet. You've got some big movies coming at the end of the year. But anyway, first of all, congratulations on Jane Campion taking home the Best Director at Venice, and Maggie Gyllenhaal, her first directorial debut. She won for screenwriting. Anyway, that's very cool, and I'm really excited to see Maggie's movie. What are you excited about on your slate in particular?
I'm excited about both those. I mean, one of the things I actually love, I love making movies, and I love filmmakers and storytellers, right? So one of the great things is I'm still get very excited, right? Like making a movie with Scorsese, with Marty, who I've known, but making The Irishman, I still get giddy about it. I still have picture, it's still important to me. He's defined so much of my life. And Jane has always been this woman I've idolized. So
Jane Campion.
Yeah, one of the pleasures of making this movie is getting to know her. She's an incredible woman. She's such a trailblazer, and it's just such a source of pride. And selfishly, I want to be around her and absorb as much as I can. And I think the film is extraordinary and beautiful. And we've got a great group of women directors this fall behind her that are kind of trailblazing like her, like Maggie and Halle Berry and Rebecca Hall and Nora, and we just have a bunch of really strong female directors that I'm excited about.
Rebecca Hall has Passing, right, which I saw. It's very good.
Yeah, which is very good. And Halle's got Bruised, which she's starring in and directing, and I think that's an exciting, evolution. We've got James Samuels, who's got this terrific movie, The Harder They Fall, which I think you're going to love.
Is that the Western?
Yeah, it's the Western.
But you guys don't have clips of any of this stuff. You're not going
We'll
to show
get it
me.
for you. We'll get it for you. We've got Red Notice, which I'm excited about, which has 3 terrific stars in Gal Gadot and Ryan Reynolds and The Rock.
Right, Ryan Reynolds and The Rock
Yep.
and Gal Gadot.
Yep.
Yeah, and what's that one about?
It's a big fun heist movie. So it's a big kind of like 3-card Monty that keeps you guessing, and it's about these 3 art thieves and who's going to figure each other out.
So if that's going to be in theaters, which you said before, right? How many theaters do you think you would put that in?
We're still working that out with exhibition.
But I mean, is it like thousands or is it like hundreds?
You know what? I don't know yet. So it's tricky because it's still an ongoing conversation and trying to figure out how when the movie gets finished and do all that.
If you could wave a wand, what would like if COVID didn't happen and you didn't have 10 other competitors?
Well, I think we'll probably be in the high hundred, like the high 600, 700, 800s, probably similar to Army of Dead, because we'll probably work with similar exhibition communities on that one.
Okay, so it's still that's somewhere between a limited release. No, it's not quite a wide release.
No,
but
it's not quite, but we're getting up there, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's just trying to figure out, like I said, there's still long-term conversations we want to work out with all those, like AMC and Regal, and and they're smart and terrific people there. So it's really trying to figure out what fits for them, and they're having this with everyone. So
you feel confident that theaters will survive?
I do. I think the movie-going experience is innate in culture. I think it's changing. I think kids are seeing things in a uniquely different way. But I do think if something matters to a 14 or 15-year-old, he or she's going to run out and see that with their friends, right? And I think it's incumbent on all of us who do that to make those movies that penetrate, whether it's there, whether it's at home, whatever it is. We're trying to culturally really hit people with lightning, right? I mean, that really is the job at the end of the day, is can you strike someone with a lightning bolt to make he or she, wherever they are in the world, go, I want to be that person, I want to do that for a living, I want to tell that story, and you get the next generation the way that, we reminisce, rightfully so, about the 70s, and I'm hoping that with these changes in windows and the opening up, you're going to hopefully find a new generation of those storytellers, right? You're going to find the next Jane Campion and the next Spike Lee, and you're going to have all these, the next Marty coming through. And you're starting to see that. I think there's a lot of really exciting filmmakers. I think the Safdie brothers are really exciting filmmakers, right?
They're so crazy.
And I think there's
talented.
So many people, and I see what Sofia Coppola continues to build in her career, and I think she's so interesting and talented. And you can go on and on. There's an enormous amount of young filmmakers that I think will tell great stories.
What as you look out over the horizon, what worries you as ahead of a now mature film business that you've built, and it's a big machine, and all this competition coming, and the difficulty of planning that COVID has kind of whipsawed everybody for the last 18 months. So what sort of keeps you up at night?
I mean, on a big level, that from a human standpoint, COVID, right? And how do we find with an ever evolving flu that gets new strains, with the economic and social inequity that we have around the globe, that is a global pandemic, how do we find ourselves back to safety, right, in the right way? How do we get our sets safe? How do we get the environment in theaters safe? How do we get all these things? So that's a challenge for all of us. It's a human challenge that we need to reconcile as humans, and how do we help others who in need at this moment? And then I think really as we move forward, I think the evolution of movie making, it's very tough right now. It's very expensive in terms of the COVID costs, and how do you keep things safe and proper? And hopefully when we get
like, what can you quantify? Like, what's the additional cost? Is it like 20% more? Or
yeah, it depends. Every film is different, right? It probably wavers between 5 and 15% on the economics, but it's the size of the crew, the size of the bubble, the size of the testing, the shutdowns that sometimes happen, as they do within everybody's movies or television shows. So I think that's a challenge right now. And I think getting people back to that vibrancy of creativity, which is nice because you can feel it in the community, right? You can feel people excited about telling new and different stories, which is exciting. And then I think, to your point, existential question is like keeping movies at the forefront of culture, right? That is something that's really thoughtful for me as someone who not only runs Netflix Film Studio, but someone who deeply loves this business and is in the academy and is someone who fancies himself part of the community. Like, how do we as a community keep this art form as relevant as it is, right? Because I do love spending time with my kids watching those movies that define my life, and I want them to do the same with theirs.
I mean, I feel, I agree with you because TikTok is like the popular thing all of a sudden, and YouTube is...
You're great on it, by the way.
Yeah, thank you so much. My dance moves are epic. Everybody at TheGrill every year is there somebody who stands up and says, yeah, my kids don't watch TV, they watch YouTube every year for the past 5 years. And it is remarkable every time you do see a great film. And, yes, I thought Power of the Dog, it moved me. Like, by the end of it, it was like, I felt like I'd gone somewhere, been taken somewhere. And sometimes wonder, okay, is our metabolism going to be able to kind of sit still and absorb that and have that patience, have the patience for that as we go forward, like what are we leaving behind, as we create these new technologies. But yeah, those are some of the things that I think about. But
I think we all do. And I think in a weird way, we all have to recognize you have to go to that generation and help them tell their story. Right? And that thing of where we all kind of go, when I was a kid, I walked 80 miles in the snow to get to school. It's like, well, they don't, right? So what is it in their narrative form? What are their storytelling tools that we can help facilitate so that whatever that is their breakfast club? It is that movie that defined their generation the way John Hughes and those movies did for certain generations. What is their mean streets? What are those things that make them go, oh, that's how I tell this story about my generation, right? Because every generation always defines art in whatever music or art form that they do. So I think, to your point, I don't want to make TikTok movies, but I think how do you find the narrative connectivity that generation is finding within that, and then expand it?
Right? Yeah. So speaking of expanding, should we expect, there's 70 movies under your tutelage this year? Is it next year 80? Is it the year after 90? I mean, is this kind of an ever-expanding universe of content?
No,
or are you sort of at steady state?
I think, listen, what we're trying to do is find, like I said, we have such a global appetite for film, right? It's an interesting thing when you're actually programming and telling stories for the world so finitely, because you're in their home and in their zeitgeist with them, and finding where those stories are. I think you're going to see an expansion of international stories, right? I think what you're seeing is a growth, and there's so many great storytellers, and we've seen it in the last few years. We were lucky with Roma, we saw it with Parasite. I think there's another great group of international stories this year. We're lucky to have Hand of God. I think you're seeing these global storytellers really rise up, and I think that's going to be an exciting expansion for us as a community as well as a company. And I think right now for us on that phase of English language and global, we're kind of at a good number. I don't see us growing. I think if anything, we refine it a little bit to try to continue to make great, right? That's my big thing is I don't think it matters to a consumer if you have 30 or 300, they just want to have them great, and that's really what we need to continue to do.
Well, Scott Stuber, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For coming to TheGrill and getting
grilled.
You got grilled.
Coming to Netflix.
And thanks to you so much, our audience, for joining us.